This is a show that brings to the forefront newsmakers, entertainers, and those making a difference in our lives and in our world. Each week is a new adventure with topics ranging from the most serious and cutting edge to the most lighthearted and entertaining.
This is Taking Care of Business with Richard Solomon.
Greetings, everyone. Richard Solomon, Taking Care of Business, and My Father's Place Radio. We are blessed, and I truly mean blessed, to have Jeremy Clyde on the phone with us. If you don't know Jeremy Clyde, he has a resume that if I actually started just listing all of the things that he's done from the 1960s, being part of Chad and Jeremy, and acting and movies and all kinds of music and the like, the show would be over and we would have a chance to talk to our guests. So without further ado, thank you so much for being with us. And,
it's a pleasure.
All right, so,
thank you.
So you're going to be performing at My Father's Place.
I'm going to be performing at My Father's Place. I'm on the Thursday, this August the 2nd, it says. Yes. And what I'm doing there is kind of, I've got a lot of, it's called the Bottom Drawer Sessions. That's the generic title. In other words, I've got all this material that I've been writing, actually in conjunction with a guy. There was I'll tell you when it was. It was December 1979. The noted jazz singer, Annie Ross, I ran into her in London, and she says, "Oh, I'm giving a party. Why don't you come?" "Oh, fine, yeah." So we got dolled up, and off we went. And there I met a guy who is very tall. I thought he was actually American. He turned out to be Canadian, and he had a big cowboy hat on, which is unusual in London. I said, "What do you do?" He says, "I'm a lyricist." I said, "I've always wanted to meet a lyricist." And his name was David Pierce, Big Dave, as he was known, because of his tall nature. And I went round to his place, looked in his bottom drawer, and there were an astonishing amount of poems and short stories and lyrics and anything you could see. And he'd actually been working with other people turns out I knew. It was a band called Meal Ticket. Anyway, he and I did 35 years hard work, and he left us some years ago, about 5 years ago, and I realized that all this material, some of which Chad and I had touched, but it was so vast. I mean, it's a huge catalog. And I decided to put it out because it won't exist unless I do something about it. And so about 4 years ago, I put out the Bottom Drawer Sessions #1, and recently, Bottom Drawer Sessions #4. They've gone that way, and there will be, I think, 7, possibly 8. And with that, armed with that, and a lot of stuff that I did that Chad and I did in the late 60s, which I wrote all the songs for, from the later albums of Cabbages and Kings and The Ark. And you put all that together, plus the hits, and suddenly it's actually quite an extraordinary sort of show. And I'm trying it out. Kate Taylor, sister of the famous Taylor family, so sister of James, is coming to help out. She's going to open, and I'll hope to get her back on stage at the end and all that. We have yet to do this. This is a great experiment. And anybody that wants to come along and see something that is going to be, I don't know, I hope. I tried it out once, and it really, really worked. And and that's what I'm up to. Plus, I'm working with Peter Asher, because now Gordon having died some years ago and Chad having retired, Peter and I are going out and having more fun than you can believe. And as Peter likes to say, we've got twice the hits and twice the stories, and it's true. So that's the commercial end. And then there's the, and I'm trying different stuff. And anyway, that's what I'm up to.
All right, so let me ask a couple of questions, because in some ways, it's almost like a time machine. So you're taking, the current age and your current wisdom and experience, and you're revisiting things that you wrote when your emotions and your inspirations and your perspectives were probably different, because technology was different, the world was different, everything was different. How do you look at it now?
Well, that's the point. Absolutely right. the two last albums I mentioned. Well, I've got to tell you a quick story. I went into a record shop in England within the past 6 months, and I was chatting to the guy. Oh yeah, CDs. Yeah, I can't move them. Blah blah blah. Except he says, yes. I say, for 60s psychedelic. I said, really, really. And it turns out that the two albums we made at the end of the 60s, so 67, 68, Cabbages and Kings and the Ark, both for Columbia, have now become this sort of cult albums. And people have an interest. And people have all these programs about 50 years ago, 1968, and you find it, and I have dug out some of these songs, and they're really interesting to hear, stripped down about basically how I, and therefore we, because I was just reflecting the culture, felt about things that were going on then. And you can look at those songs and you say, well, did the dream work? Did it? Did some of it work? It's interesting. It has a real perspective, which I did not expect, by the way, when I started on this.
When you
and the other thing is that the guys of my generation come out and say, "No, I'd like to do a new song," and the whole place empties because they're bored. But in the bottom drawer, which goes from 1970 to 2015, these aren't new songs. Some of these are from the 70s, some of these are from the 80s, 90s. They're a great mixture of influences and times, and it's interesting to look back.
So as a music archaeologist of your own archaeology, what is the trend that you've seen what have you noticed about your own evolution of your own music and style over that time period? Now that you have the beauty of a rearview mirror.
Well, yes, it's one of the things is we started out as folk singers because that's what Chad and I both play guitar. Chad also a wonderful piano player was, and so we started out doing sort of copying what we heard from America. So there was, I was a guy called Josh White, who I was very, very taken with, who's a bit sort of cult person now. But it could be anyone. It could be the Peter, Paul and Mary or the Kingston Singers or anything, Kingston Brothers. But actually, what's interestingly now is that acoustic music is now being called folk again. Something has happened in the intervening, so that anybody who plays a sort of an acoustic guitar, and it can have a nice rock beat now, that is quite acceptable. Folk music doesn't have to be about sailors in the 1800s, it's become some. So the definition of folk music has changed and has come back full circle to encompass the kind of thing that I like to do and write. Interesting.
In the 1960s, how did American folk music differ from British folk music?
Well, it was slavery was obviously a huge part of it, and railways and the West, the opening up, and of course the romance of American names. Tallahassee and Route 66, and I don't know. They have it's not the same if you talk about Crewe or Doncaster. English names don't have that. Okay. There is a sort of wonderful romance of the American West, which still comes through folk songs, particularly.
Good branding.
And whereas English folk songs tend to be about fishing and people dying at sea and being unhappy about it. Usually sung by the wife who's been left behind. Or mining disasters. They cut across. You have mining disasters too. But historically, it's the American West that is a huge influence.
What drew you to folk music as opposed to any other contemporary music that you were growing up with or heard?
Well, I mean, I was brought up, I suppose, on the American musical, so the Great American Songbook now, as it's now known. The Rodgers and Hart and all the rest of them. That was mine. I started to learn the piano, and in the age that I was brought up in, teaching methods were pretty rough. So if you played a bum note, which I did a lot of, the guy who was teaching, the teacher, would stand behind you and hit you across the back of the head. And unsurprisingly, this wasn't so much fun. And so I stopped piano lessons and took up the ukulele. And from the ukulele, I took up the guitar. And once you take up the guitar, you're in guitar world. And now you're in the world of, and then Elvis arrives, who brings together soul music, country music, the whole stew. And so it's Elvis who is the great opener of the door, particularly to English people, because they'd never heard anything like it. Can I drop a name very quickly, which is George Harrison once told me how he was on a bicycle on the outskirts of Liverpool somewhere. He must have been very young, and he heard this music, and it was obviously good weather. The music, where the window was open, he was passing a house where the window was open, and there was a song being played, presumably on a gramophone, as we then would have said. And it was such an amazing sound, he had to get off his bicycle and stand under the window and wait until it was over. And what he was listening to was Heartbreak Hotel, which was the first Elvis record that we had in England, because everything was slightly different. And that, a whole generation. Peter Asher, who I'm working with now, an old friend of mine, Peter and Gordon, we've known each other for a long, long time. We agree. That was the moment when we all got off our bicycles and went, okay, this is for us.
Is that when the lightning struck? When Ben Franklin was flying the kite and the lightning storm?
That's the one. That's it. Bing.
Now, when you took the piano lessons, was that your idea or was your parents' idea?
It was my parents' idea.
And
they knew I was musical. I could sing in tune from a very early age and showed a considerable interest. And so the piano lessons, thank you, for paying for them. But it was the teaching methods. And once I'd sort of got my hands on the guitar, everything goes from there, because it's the generational instrument, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned George Harrison. George Harrison was famous for ukuleles. He'd have people over his house and they'd hand them ukuleles.
I've been there.
So what was that like? When they break out the ukuleles.
Fun, except my ukulele chords. I've got 5 chords now that I can remember, because I was 11 or something, and I was still playing, and I haven't sort of kept it up. But for those of us, a lot of other people kept it up, so I was sort of scraping along behind.
So what did you guys play together?
What?
When you and George were playing the ukulele?
Oh, well, this was, I don't know, I can't remember.
You playing folk songs? You playing,
Yeah, no, George, no, mainly, he was a huge fan of George Formby. Okay. And this may not be known much to American audiences. I'm leaning on the lamppost at the corner of the street until my little old lady goes by. Oh me, oh my. He was a huge star in pre-war England, and he played a banjo-lele, if you want to get technical.
Wow.
And he was very good at it too. And he was the man. So it was a lot of, from George's point of view, it was a lot of northern, because George was very northern. He was Lancashire. And he sang in that dialect, and that was George's great influence, which I didn't share. I sit back and admire.
Wow. So what other influences did you have? So you have the Elvis moment. What other? We have 2 minutes in this segment. But what other things started shaping you on your journey So you got the piano lessons, you got these other things, you got your guitar. Elvis, what's now converging on you? What's
rock and roll? Rock and roll. It's Eddie Cochran. It's Buddy Holly. It's it's Gene Vincent. It's everything that 1956. The gears change. Everything changes. And a whole generation goes, hang on a minute, this is for us. And I was incredibly swept up in that. Plus, of course, there is still, was then, I guess, Cliff Richard and the Shadows. Now, this is not a band that's known very much over here, but Hank Marvin, lead guitarist, and Bruce Welsh, rhythm guitarist, Chad and I, Chad would pretend to be Hank and I would be Bruce. And we have a little band when we were at drama school and called the Jerks.
Interesting name.
We were truly pretty jerkish, not too good, but actually, basically, we were doing Shadows covers. This is all very English stuff, and it never really made it across the pond. Although, if you scratch any musician from my generation, they'll all tell you about Hank Marvin and the influence he was to us all.
So, I probably won't be able to get the full answer on this because we only have a little bit of time in this segment. But
I can try and keep it quick.
What radio stations were you listening to capture all this great music?
Yeah.
Or was it live? Or was it like were you trying to catch it live or radio?
No. It was very difficult. It was very, very difficult to listen to. They were playing light music, which was, I don't know, Patti Page and that kind of stuff. But there was a pirate radio.
The famous movie that they made about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you listen to that?
That came later. No. First of all, there was Radio Luxembourg, which was being broadcast with a lot of sort of intermittent signal, frankly, on medium wave or something, or long wave. And then later, you got the pirates who just sat in ships being seasick or just offshore, about 12 miles offshore, and therefore could get round the business of, because there was also, the Musicians Union had great arguments about that music should be live. So playing records was taking away musicians' living. And so a lot of, when Chad and I later started to get hits in England, we would do live radio shows live with orchestras.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, let me cut you off right here for 1 second. This is Richard Solomon with Jeremy Clyde. Please don't leave us. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is the Great Thordini. You're listening to Richard Solomon on 88.1 FM WCWP.
All right, welcome back. Richard Solomon, Jeremy Clyde. This is an incredible show. For those who are just joining us, hop right in. We're talking about all kinds of great moments in music history that Jeremy Clyde was part of. Now, I didn't even get a chance to ask you about your television appearances in the 1960s. You were on Batman, Patty Duke, all this really wild stuff. How did that? I don't mean to transgress, but how did you get involved in that? And I have some interesting stories about that.
Okay, well, and first of all, the first was the Dick Van Dyke Show. The story was basically that we, because as you may know, I have another career as an actor in England, but Chad and I met at drama school. That's where we met, at the Central School of Speech and Drama. He wasn't actually on the drama course. He was on the teacher training course. But people knew I strummed a few chords, and somebody came up at the beginning of the second year, which was, I'd been there a year, and said, hey, there's a new guy. He's arrived. He's really good. He can play. And there was this big hit by the Shadows, which I was just talking about. And he said, he can play Apache the whole way through. I said, take me to this musical genius, my God. And that's how Chad and I met. So, what was the question? Sorry.
No. So, how did you get involved in all these TV shows like Batman, Patty Duke?
So they knew. So the word went around that we could handle a little bit of dialogue. I wouldn't call it great acting, but we could say a line and stand up straight and make it sort of a bit of comedy timing, maybe. And that's how we got certainly started with the Dick Van Dyke Show. And there's, there was an extraordinary thing. There was a moment they were so nice to us. I mean, we were so green. We were just straight out of drama school. You know, what were we doing there? We were there with the comedy gods. And they would encourage you, had sort of like 5 days rehearsal, and then you shoot it, and then people took the weekend off, and they'd do another one. And they'd say, do try anything, throw anything in. So I put in this ridiculous joke. And the joke was, I point to a piece of furniture in the house.
In Rob and Laura's house.
In Rob and Laura, thank you, Rob and Laura's house. And I say, do you know what we call one of these in England? And Dick says no, and I say, a chair. Now, Dick thought this was very funny. He thought this, we got to keep this in, we're going to keep it in, we're going to keep it in. And if you look at the tape, actually, it gets a huge laugh. And I think it's a really lame joke. But all I can tell you is Chad and I, some years ago now, were checking into an airport. And the guy looks at us, and he looks at the guitars, and he looks up, and he says, a chair. So there you are. So, hey, man, it wasn't that bad. So that we did that. We did the Patty Duke show. We did 2 episodes of Batman. And the Catwoman stole our voices and put them in a box and held the British government to ransom. And the British government refused to pay up. There's a wonderful line which the British ambassador was given to say, which is, Chad and Jeremy, not a penny for those blighters. Great stuff, great stuff.
What?
So, yeah, that's how it worked. And it was such fun. Now, interestingly, at the time, we were seen as being a bit lightweight. We weren't being serious musicians. We weren't being, we weren't out there. We were sort of making fools of ourselves on television. And actually, it's completely, like so many things, it's interesting to look back, it's completely switched. Because those shows, because they've been run, have now gone into the consciousness and have now completely sort of kept us alive in a funny kind of way in the American consciousness. Well, certainly helped it.
Oh,
interesting how it works.
And these are iconic shows, you know, Patty Duke.
Now.
And, you know, when I was little, I was on an airplane to Florida, and I'm sitting in the airplane with my parents. It was probably an Eastern Airlines plane. And I get a little tap on my shoulder from the seat behind me. And a gentleman says, do you like Batman? And I'm like, of course. It turned out he was the producer for the Batman television series. And he gave me like these autographed, you know, cards of like Batman and Robin. I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool, you know? And it's just, you know, it's funny, you know, and look, Dick Van Dyke is still around. He does like those Tai Chi commercials and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they repeat all, you know, there's like a network that has, you know, all the old shows. There's actually several of them. There's BTV, there's Cozy, there's a bunch of them, Antenna TV. Yeah. And, you know, when you look back at, you know, some of those episodes were filmed in black and white. And you look at the people, they were just, you know, the sets were simpler, you know. What was it like what was Mary Tyler Moore like? Because she was very young.
Great. Then. They were both so kind, so welcoming, so completely as you would want them to be. Now, this isn't always the case in show business, but you know, in this case, I can certainly say that they were just lovely, and that's why. I mean, I felt, you know, relaxed enough to try out things. Because they were trying out things. Does that work? I don't know. Do you think?
Yeah.
It might. You know, it was an actor thing, and I immediately responded to that and said, well, how about if I do this? And they would go, yeah, or no, or maybe. And it was that relaxed. And there's Carl Reiner. I mean, these people are gods. And so there you are. So they were sweet. Absolutely sweet.
Did you feel like you knew them because you watched some of their shows, and then when you got
to
meet them?
No, because we hadn't much watched. I mean, we came to America in early '64, January '64, for the first time, and that's when I first saw that sort of American television. So I'd seen a little bit, but I came from a different culture where there were different heroes on television. And in fact, there was hardly any television. Television only really arrived in England in 1953 because of the coronation, when everybody wanted to watch this big event, and television sets became suddenly everybody went out and got one. But until that, I mean, I was brought up only on radio.
But in many ways, did that expand your imagination?
Oh, wonderful. As they all, I mean, the old thing is, the pictures are better on radio.
I may have to say that. So I did
listen. Yeah, take it. It's yours.
So I did a little pre-production research, and I did read that of course you have to ask the sources that you have some relationship to the royal family.
No. No, noble, if you wish to get that. My grandfather at the time of the coronation was the 7th Duke of Wellington. And as the Duke of Wellington, if you're going to be part of the ceremony, which he was very, very much part of the ceremony, you have to have a page, and a page carries your coronet so that you can put it on your head once the monarch has been crowned. Everybody puts their hats on. Trust me, it's England. We do different things. We do things differently over there. And so that's what I was. That's my. I was part of the coronation. And one of the weird things, and Peter Asher and I, in our show, talk about this, is that we discovered that at the same time as I'm feet from the Queen, watching it all happen, really an extraordinarily upfront, privileged position. But above me, in the choir, without a view at all, was the young Keith Richards.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And we've actually come up with a picture of him at the choir, with his choir. Anyway, there you are.
So of all these people that you've rubbed elbows with, who else have you collaborated with, or had jam sessions with, or got to be musical with?
Well, actually, I haven't much. There's a reason for that, and that is that Chad and I arrive in '64. We break up in early '69. I then go back to England and start another career, which involves going to the West End and then at Broadway, and I'm doing plays and all kinds of other things, and tellies. And then Chad and I we try to get together in the 80s, and that doesn't really work, because if you're going to be an acoustic duo and you're going to get together in the mid-80s, the time when Madonna's just starting out, and actually everybody's on synthesizers with huge hair and big shoulders. I mean, it isn't the time for an acoustic duo. It could hardly have been the worst time. But we had we did well. We had a great young band, but it just fell apart. Timing. And then, in sort of the early 2000s, PBS got onto us and said, do you want guys who want to try something, just come out and do 20 minutes, and it's a concert with a lot of oldies. And I wasn't as busy as I should have been, and Chad was up for it, and we got together and we rehearsed up 20 minutes and walked on, just the two of us, with two acoustic guitars, or acoustic guitar and piano, and did our 20 minutes, and people went mad. And we looked at each other and said, well, we've got to do some more of this. And that's when we've done sort of 15 years before Chad retired, basically. And now I'm with Peter. So the answer is I haven't been hanging around other musicians, because I've been in completely another world. I was a member of Sir Laurence Olivier's Old Vic company in London, which is, serious classical theatre. It's a different world. So I've only really worked with Chad, to be truthful. Now I'm having enormous fun, because I'm beginning to work with all kinds of, I'm working on the date that we, at my father's place on the August the 2nd. There's a marvelous cello player called Emily Elkin, who is going to come on and do some things with me as well. And Kate Taylor is starting off the thing, and we'll probably try and get her back on towards the end. And I'm working with all kinds of new musicians. I'm actually starting to work with new musicians for the first time now, and it's very, very exciting.
So what is new and what is the same about being with new musicians when you're doing duets and things like that?
Musicians are musicians. I'm tending to work with people who play acoustic instruments, because that's my kind of bag. And, if you're a guitarist, you have either, you've got certain skills. There's a possible violinist I want to work with. I'd love to work with a trio or something at some point. I've just been trying some rather funk tracks. I'm looking out for the future. I'm exploring, because now Chad has retired in a funny kind of way. If you are part of a double act, and the guy is still around, and he's a really wonderful musician, and he's an old friend of yours, why look elsewhere?
Well,
but it's interesting, because it's sort of pushed me into this late surge.
When you do things now, do you ever call up Chad and just say, I need to run this by you?
No, I'd love to. I'd love to. He's the old boy is slowing down a bit and has gone into a bit of a different space, and sort of doesn't want to know, because what we did is what we did, and I sort of think he would like to be out on the road, maybe, but doesn't feel he's up to it anymore, and so there's a sort of, I think he's closed that door, rather. Yeah. Which is a shame, but there you are. I mean, that's what happens. People grow old at different speeds, I guess.
So speaking of the road, what are the venues that you really love playing in? Because there's all kinds of venues with all kinds of sound systems and energy, or audience energy. Some are more intimate.
Ooh,
what are the ones that you're like, wow, remember that show?
The Wolf Trap Barns in Virginia have the most. It's a barn, and it's wood, and they have the most wonderful sound system. And Chad and I sold it out regularly. I've yet to go back. I'd love to. That was a particular favorite. There was a show, we did a bit of a kind of special for, I suppose, for Cousin Brucey.
Okay. A former guest of this show. Yes.
Oh, right. There you are. And Peter and I went on, and we did not our normal show, which is much more discursive, and we show clips from Batman and all the rest of it, and tell stories and jokes and all that kind of stuff. But this was just knock out the hits time. And there were, over 7,000 people there.
Wow.
And which is a nice crowd. And we got to the end of Summer Song, and they just wouldn't stop applauding. It just went on and on and on.
Must have been touching.
That was extraordinary. And that was a few months ago. I mean, earlier this year. And that was extraordinary to go. I hadn't played in front of that kind of crowd for a long time. And what is extraordinary about Summer Song is it has this sort of iconic quality now, which seems to be getting more. I mean, Chad and I always knew that, because it was our song and we'd do it and people would applaud. But it seemed to be getting more and more. And I think it's because time has passed. It's becoming more iconic. People's memories are, and also it's been in movies. It's been in Rushmore and Princess Diaries and Men in Black 3.
Okay.
So there you are.
Well, it's funny when people like myself are, in the radio studio, and we're talking to other radio people, and we talk about the soundtrack that we grew up. That song, that was part of what all of us listened to. So and it's almost a part of our music DNA, as So I mean, there's a lot of songs that are out there, but I think the songs that we grew up on, because I grew up in the '60s, and so to me that was like, wow, those were the first real songs that you heard repeatedly, and that was just part of everything, and then. Now it brings back that memory, like, oh, remember when we used to listen to that or those songs? Yeah. It was spectacular. So for all the people like myself who were back in those days listening to you, I want to thank you now, because I couldn't thank you personally then.
Thank you, Rich. My dear fellow.
But I want to say thank you for making some of the most important music that I grew up on, and it's always good to be able to tell the people at some point, hey, that was a song.
It's a very weird thing, because while you're doing it, you don't know the effect you're having. if you're the person sort of doing it, anyway, in that case, back then, in 64, 65, 66, one was on a roller coaster. You just did what people told you, went onto the stage, you did the interview, you did the television, you didn't sleep, you just did. And it's only later that people come up and tell you. I mean, I'll tell you, there's a guy came up to us once who was one of the most extraordinary things that ever been said to me, actually. Came up after a show, this was Chad and I, a show, and said, I just want to tell you guys that you got me through Vietnam.
Wow.
That's a hell of a thing for somebody to say.
Wow.
And what he meant was there was a compilation tape of which Summer Song was on it. And that compilation tape got him through Vietnam.
Wow.
And that's, and you think, wow, how did that happen? You were just sort of, got lucky. Anyway,
maybe.
Amazing.
We'll be right back. Richard Solomon, Jeremy Clyde. Don't miss the rest. This is going to be awesome.
Hey, this is Jeff Mattson, the Dark Star Orchestra, and you're listening to Richard Solomon on WCWP 88.1 FM.
All right, Richard Solomon, Taking Care of Business, My Father's Place Radio, Jeremy Clyde. Such a great show. So vinyl's back, right?
Yes. I mean, of all things. And what is interesting, because we are going to put out the Bottom Drawer Sessions. Okay, I've been putting this stuff out for the past 4 years, nearly 5. And it's got a small but fanatical following. These songs, and people have got, oh my God, I didn't know, you realize you had all this. Yes, well, I've been writing for all these years. And what is interesting about them is that they've dated, because the archive goes from 1970 to 2015. But actually, the guy who wrote the lyrics, Big Dave Pierce.
The guy with the cowboy hat.
Yeah, the cowboy hat guy. Who died about 5 years ago, I suppose, now. And great friend. And he and I would meet from time to time in various... He lived in Paris a lot. We worked in England, Los Angeles, and Paris over the years, over 35 years. When I was free, basically, we'd sort of nip over and we'd work very hard for 10 days, and then I'd go away and do other things. And the songs have not dated. The music has dated much less than the lyrics. Because the lyrics, what has happened is that people remember each other's telephone numbers, or can't get hold of each other, or write letters, or receive letters, sometimes scented. This world has now gone. And it's fascinating, because it's fine. I don't care. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is all part of a past era. And what is extraordinary is the world has now come round again. This keeps happening every time. If you live long enough, this is what happens. And suddenly vinyl is back. And we're going to put out a special best-of sort of called Top Drawer. And the box set, but the box set will be the chest of drawers, of course. So the Bottom Drawer Sessions will carry on for as many albums as I can come up with, which I think is about 7, possibly 8. And then we will start digging into that, and we've now got the Top Drawer, the vinyl album, and they really belong on vinyl, and it's extraordinary. I mean, because they were written for a vinyl age.
It's so true.
And I'm very happy with this. And in a funny kind of way, you stop being dated and you start being classic. He said, hopefully.
So do you have a vinyl record collection?
I do, but which I haven't played much, to be honest, recently. I do have it. I know my son plays a lot of vinyl. And I know people who will only listen now on vinyl. And a lot of musicians will only collect on vinyl. I've been rather overly fond of CDs, which I now have so many thousands that I'm in it's a bit of a crisis, really. So I've got to have a dig through.
I'll tell you what the real I'll tell you what the real crisis is, because I have a lot of CDs myself. I've noticed that the new automobile manufacturers are not putting CD players in the newer cars. That's the crisis. Not having the CDs, is not being able to play them.
I completely agree with you. I just bought a car, which is basically a sort of nearly new job, and I had to look around to find a car that still has a CD player in it, because that's what I wanted. But I found one. Yeah, it's a real problem.
All right, do you still have the disc washer? And you know how when we all used our vinyl records, we used to have to like de-dust them? And you took the disc washer and you put the liquid on it over the red velvet. You had to like wipe off.
Yeah, I've still got it. Yes, and it still works.
So I'll tell you a great story. Dennis McNamara, who was the programming director of WLIR, and he's a friend, and he was a guest on the show. And he told me a great story. He was driving on the way to WLIR one morning, and he hears shk, shk, shk. And I knew it that way. Apparently, the DJ passed out, and the last song on the record was going. It was just skipping back and forth.
Yeah.
And because he said, "Oh my God, there's still, there's dead air." So, but you can't get that. That's truly part of the whole vinyl
that's
experience.
Part of the magic,
right? The
and
hisses, the pops,
and crackles at the beginning. Absolutely, at the beginning of every track, and carefully lifting the needle and all that. I know.
Now, were you one of those people who had you had the Technics turntable and the Marantz, equalizer and the Harman-Kardon speaker? Because you had to have, you couldn't buy one brand. You had to buy different components and put them together. Because,
I got rid of equipment now that I look back and think, ooh, I wish I hadn't done that. But there we are. That's true of everybody.
So what was the first 45 or 78 or 33 that you remember buying yourself?
The first 78, and by the way, I have pretty much all the first English releases on 78 that Elvis did.
Wow.
The first 78 I brought was Cool Water by Frankie Lane. And the first 45 I bought was Diana, Paul Anka.
Wow.
There you are.
See how you just knew that?
I knew it instantly.
We all know that.
I knew it instantly. Yes.
See, everybody who loved music in that day.
Yes.
Do you remember where you bought them?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, where'd you buy?
Yeah, I bought them because I bought them at school, because there was a record shop where you could, if you were allowed to go into the town, which you were occasionally, you could go into the record shop and stand in booths and hear the record. They play it for you in the booth.
I do remember that. Yes, we had that here too.
Okay.
Yeah, you were able
that's it. That's where I bought them. That's where they came from.
All right, so then let's fast forward for a second. You're driving in a car. You're listening to the radio, and you hear one of your songs as you're in the car. When was the first time you remember that, and what was that like as a feeling to you?
Listen, I worked with a lot of wonderful musicians, particularly recently, and over there, met a lot of people when I was working with Chad. And they all say, I know a lot of people who are musical geniuses, and they've never had that feeling. They've never heard it. They've never been driving along and had, hey, there's a great new record by, this is, and all that radio talk. And then hear yourself on the radio. Well, I first heard myself on the radio in England, with a song called Yesterday's Gone, which was a hit in England. It's our first record. And it's an extraordinary feeling, and it's not given to anybody. It's really, so many people who deserve it have never heard this. They've never had that experience.
So do you now look at your videos from the 60s and things like that when you were on television, and can you go back and actually remember those moments as you lived that moment? Or do you kind of see it? Or do you kind of see it as some other guy? Even though it's you, it's just some other guy because you're just different now. Or is it both? Or is it a little bit of in the middle?
It's an interesting one. If you're talking about the Dick Van Dyke Show or something like that, or the Batman, I see somebody giving a performance. If you're talking about cheesy videos that we did, miming to something on the Dick Clark Show, I think that's a different world. That is very strange, because you're just standing there doing strange things that it looks cheesy, and there are people sort of pretending to do dancing around you and all that. Those teen shows that we all used to do. They're very odd. They're stranger than the Batmans and the Dick Van Dykes.
Was that the first reality TV in a way?
Yeah, what a good statement that is. In a funny kind of way, yeah. And I look back at there was some teen show that we hosted, and there was Stevie Wonder. He was on it, and I've worked with extraordinary people. Dionne Warwick was on something, I remember. Extraordinary bills have been on with people who are geniuses. Well, on a bill with Chuck Berry once, and Roy Orbison, and extraordinary. But that's the stuff I remember, the backstage stuff, and the hero worship stuff. So it's looking at those clips can sometimes be pretty cheesy. Honestly. So
when does the memoir come out? Why not? You have great stories.
Well, I'll tell you what the problem with the memoir is that the publishers always want to know about the sex, basically. They want to know about, my sex and drugs years. That's what they want. And they want names, and they want salacious details and all that. I had a little moment with, quite a big moment with Marianne Faithfull, but she wrote about that in her book, so I'm allowed to say that.
That's called waiver.
And she's still an old friend. But that's an area I really don't want to get into. Also because I didn't have my drugs hell. I've gone on and done other things, and life has gone on, and still here and still able to string a sentence together. So it's sort of, it's kind of, that's the stuff I avoid rather. But maybe one of these days, I don't know. The more I talk about it, the more I go, well, maybe,
As a fan, okay, just in a humble opinion as a fan, I would love to either hear a podcast of these great memories and collaborations and bands and meetings.
Well,
you might have
talked me into it. We'll see, Richard. We'll see. We'll see how we go.
So, all right. So let's talk about the future, because so what do we have coming down the road? We got all these concerts and all these things, and your 7 or 8 future bottom drawer things.
Yeah. First of all, Peter Asher, Jeremy Clyde are doing the Peter and Gordon catalog and the Chad and Jeremy catalog. And plus some other things, all kinds of covers and things, influences. We're putting in an Ed Sheeran song in the next set, I think, which because Peter's produced Ed and knows him, and we're sort of mixing and matching. That's the commercial. That's the nostalgia set. But because I started putting out these albums very quietly, and they started to get this considerable following. Really extraordinary. I'm going to continue doing those. The bottom drawer sessions has become a sort of, is to clear out my bottom drawer, because if you think about it, if you've got songs and, you're suddenly no longer around, the songs don't exist. They can only exist if you record them. A poet can write down a few lines on a piece of paper and then croak, and somebody can come across a piece of paper. But you actually have to go into a studio and make music for it to live, to be there. So that's what I'm doing, and it's really and because it's got interest, and because it's getting interest from another generation, this is the real point. And that's really extraordinary to me. But this is what's coming along. Is that, yes, there are the people who come to because they were there and they remember and they grew up with, But then there's their children and their children's children. And then there are people in their teens or early 20s who are obsessed by the 60s because the 60s never went away.
No.
That's the extraordinary thing. Unlike other generations, they just didn't leave. And their echoes are still with us in the most extraordinary way. And that is what is so much fun to look back on, and also to, say, well, actually, you like this song from 1979, from 69, which I recorded, but how about this one, which I never got around to recording, which is from 1970?
Well,
and they go, wow, that's really interesting. It's never been heard before. I don't know. It's never been heard before. It's been in the bottom drawer.
Well, if you want a little suggestion, a humble suggestion, how about a radio series with all this stuff?
I'd love to. I'd absolutely love to.
I think you should get on the air and do,
Listen, here's my problem, Rich. Listen, here's my problem. I don't live here. I live in England. I've got a sort of another whole life. I've just come off an aeroplane, and I'm going to do some dates, and then I'm going to go home. But you're absolutely right. Somehow, Peter Asher's been doing his serious Beatles stuff, and I guess maybe one of these days, if I can get it together. But I know he has it's a hell of a job just putting it on the radio. You've got to kind of keep it going, and you've got to put a lot of time and work in. And he lives in the place where he records, which is California.
Well, if you need,
I don't know. It's a thought.
If you need a cheering section, call me.
Fine, you're on. Okay.
In the last minute or two, tell me about Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey. Oh God, yeah. Well, it's become this huge thing. I mean, when I did it, it was just a sort of I popped in and hid behind a moustache, and a lot of people didn't know I was doing it because I was doing a bit of acting and pretending I wasn't me, and that's what to me acting is about. It's about transformation. I don't like being me particularly. I like to, when I'm doing that, and actually when I started to work with Chad again, I had to teach myself how to be me on stage because I was so used to being characters on stage. Now I'm quite happy. I've learned how to do it. But I had to start again because I was so used to being a character and walking on stage left and saying the lines and walking off again. That just, who am I? It's a big question. The persona. And I now have got I've learned, but I had to start from the beginning. Downton Abbey was great fun. Lovely.
Wow.
Sweet people, loved it.
All right, so in the last 30 seconds, first of all, thank you so much for spending an hour with me. I really do. Social media, where could people find your social media stuff, Facebook and all that great stuff?
BottomDrawSessions.com. Jeremy Clyde has a web page. The Chad and Jeremy website is still up and running, and there are links all over there. And on the Jeremy Clyde and Bottom Drawer Sessions, there are videos, there are commentaries on the tracks, when they were written, what was going on at the time, all that kind of thing. So there's a whole world. And people have now got this Bottom Drawer Sessions thing going, and it's kind of a joke also. It's kind of, I'm not trying to make the great album. I'm just clearing out the bottom drawer.
and with that, thank you so kindly. Thank you for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure.
And
what fun.
Love the stories. And for those who listened, thank you for being part of my radio family. We'll see you next week. And if you can, catch Jeremy at my father's place. All right, we'll see you in a week.